The playoffs for VCT Americas Stage 2 are right around the corner. Now that the group stage is over, it's time to do another weekly power rankings heading into this playoff weekend. For those that don't know, I do weekly power rankings for the VCT Americas region, moving teams up and down based off of their most recent performance. And there were some interesting matchups that happened over the weekend, and now we have the playoff bracket completely set and ready to go. So how are these teams looking heading into this very important part of the season? So this is the board we have today. If you are returning, you already know that we are starting from number 12, going from bottom to top. And starting off at number 12 is our resident number 12 holders, and that is Furia. So the season is finally over for this team. It was just an abysmal season from front to back, only having one official win in the VCT this season, and that was when they had a sub-roster at the start of kickoff. So it wasn't with any version of the roster that the Furia organization put together. So it's just been completely abysmal, whether it be visa issues, players not performing up to a level that they thought they would, just a hurricane of terrible over this team for the entire season. But now it's all over, now they can stop, and hey, we'll see if any of these players even have a tier 1 job next year. It might be hard for some of them. Moving on to number 11, no change from last week, we have 2Game. So 2Game did have a better year than their Furia Brazilian counterpart, but it still ended up not being a good year overall, only getting, I believe, 2 wins in the VCT in total this year, but at least that is with rosters they actually put together. So this team was pretty bad all year, but still had some moments of actually looking pretty good, keeping some games competitive, getting a win over Loud in stage 1, that was a pretty big upset at the time, and keeping some games close during this stage 2. They took a map off of Sentinels this week, so that is not without recognition. I might end up doing a post-mortem for some of the Ascension teams that will not be returning next year, probably in between the end of stage 2 and Champions. Obviously we don't know every single team that is returning next year yet, but I still think it might be interesting to look at 2Game's year and talk about where it went wrong. Moving on to the number 10 spot, we have Evil Geniuses. Once again, staying in the same place. I'm sorry, there wasn't a ton of movement at the bottom of the board this week. Evil Geniuses do get a win over Furia, but much like any other team that I've talked about when they beat Furia, I don't really give them too many points for that. It was a good win overall. Furia did get to 9 rounds in map 2, so that is a better performance that Furia have had over most of their opponents that they've faced. And Evil Geniuses only won 1 pistol during that match, so I definitely do think Evil Geniuses are the worst team heading into playoffs. If they're in the other group, there's no way this team is anywhere near playoffs with how they've been performing, but they are in a group with 2Game and Furia, who are below them in both standings and power rankings. So they do kind of get lucky in that respect. They needed to beat Furia to make it to playoffs, and now we'll see if they can go on another surprise run. They did a surprise run in stage 1, not making it to Toronto or anything, but getting top 4 and looking pretty good while doing it. So do they end up doing that again? I find it unlikely, but they're no stranger to lower bracket run, so we will see if they can pull something out of it. Moving on to the number 9 spot, yet again no change from last week, it's Loud. So Loud have yet another game where they make it close, they have a lead, and then they end up losing the game anyway. Playing against MIBR, a team that did have something to fight for while they were out of playoffs, they still needed that champs point. Loud with nothing to fight for at that point, they still put up a pretty good fight. Nothing wrong with fighting for pride, and they did have a 10-4 lead on Icebox at one point, but MIBR are very good at that map, and they started to remember that while playing Loud, so they do end up staying in the same place. Pretty unfortunate year for Loud overall. At times they look good, and so many of their losses were just so close. So we'll see how they end up changing their roster from next year. I do expect there to be quite a few changes. Do they go back to an all-Brazilian roster? I think that would probably be a good idea, but definitely keep Luke Show. That's absolutely a player that they need to keep. He has been lights out for this team, even when they've been losing. And we'll see if any of the other new additions like Verdi or Robbie BK end up staying. I'm guessing probably not Robbie, but maybe Verdi. Moving on to the number 8 spot, C9, same spot as last week. Again, just not a lot of change at the bottom of this board, guys, but C9, they had a chance to move up this week. If they had performed better against G2, maybe took that to map 3, maybe I would have moved them up and moved some other teams down, but C9 ending up coming out flat against G2, and that has been my concern about this team the entire stage, and it will continue to be my concern about them until they prove me wrong. As Bren has said in Plaid Chat, they're a gatekeeper team at this point. They're not good enough to beat the teams above them, but they are good enough to beat all the teams below them. So Evil Geniuses, 2Game Furia, easy matchups for them, but they've faced both Sentinels and G2, who are the top teams in the region right now. So obviously you would probably expect C9 to lose to them, but at least if C9 are looking to prove that they're a top team in the Americas, then I would hope that they would have performed better, but they kind of didn't. And Baby Bay ended up having the best statistical performance of any player on G2 during that match, so even with the sub, G2 just kind of ran over them. It wasn't a complete wash for sure, but I wanted to see more from C9, and I just haven't seen it yet, so they remain in the number 8 spot. Okay, now we are finally getting into some movement on the board. I know it's been very similar to last week. I guess I'm just so good and so accurate. Anyways, at number 7, we have Crew moving down 1 spot. So Crew were at the number 6 spot last week after moving down from the number 3 spot, and now they are all the way down at number 7, looking like one of the worst teams heading into playoffs. Basically, if it wasn't for Evil Geniuses, they would probably be the worst looking team heading into that playoff bracket, ending their stage with a 2-3 record, being the 4th seed out of their group, basically making it into playoffs because they beat MIBR earlier in the stage. That is the game that basically saved their skin. If they had lost that one, then MIBR would have the head-to-head on them. But they have the same exact record as MIBR, but Crew have looked a bit stagnant recently. While they have been getting some really good performances out of players like Shy and Kesnet, their consistency and some of the players on the rest of the roster have looked a bit flat. And one thing that I've noticed with them is that they seem to be really good at starting matches. They can come out, win map 1 very convincingly, looking like they're gonna make it a quick match, and then maps 2 and 3 just end up going astray. That is exactly what happened in their last 2 matches, first against Leviathan and now against Energy this past weekend. In very similar fashions too, just looking at the scoreline real quick, they won Bind against Leviathan 13-6, then lost Haven 13-10, and then Ascent 13-4, and then against Energy they won Sunset 13-6, lost Lotus 13-7, then Haven 13-5. So their scoreline seemed pretty consistent there, the map 3s being particularly a sore spot for them. So I definitely want to see this team do better. If they end up keeping their streak of making it to champs, it's going to take a miracle at this point. They just don't look primed to go on a deep run, but they've been able to do it before after not being expected to, so maybe they're going to do it again. But I really just don't see it for this team right now. They're going to have to prove me wrong against whoever they play in that first match of their playoff bracket. Moving on to the number 6 spot, moving up 2 spots from last week, we have MIBR. So MIBR, disappointing start to the stage. They end up recovering against 100 Thieves. Then they have a close game against Energy, but still ends up being a 0-2 loss. And then other matches determine that they cannot qualify for playoffs because of head-to-head matchups after that. So heading into this last weekend, all they had to do was fight for that champs point. There's nothing else they can really do at this point to salvage their season, so might as well come out swinging and win that last game. And that is exactly what they did. They were neck and neck with Loud in the power rankings last week, being at the number 8 spot, so moving them up 2 for defeating them, I felt like that might have been a bit of a jump, but I did feel like Crew definitely needed to move down, and I liked what I saw from MIBR more than I saw against C9. So I felt like the number 6 spot, I think they're playing good enough to be there. I really wish this team was in playoffs. I think they're a very fun team to watch when they're playing well. It's been a pretty frustrating stage for them. At least they ended it with the win, but they're going to have to hope for the downfall of a few different teams if they want a chance to make it to champions. Moving on to the number 5 spot, no change from last week, we have 100 Thieves. So here's the interesting thing about this part of the board. Both Crew and 100 Thieves had pretty similar losses, but overall I do think 100 Thieves performed better against Leviathan than Crew did against Energy, and all these teams are pretty close on the power rankings, so I felt like it's fine to drop Crew down that 1 spot, but keep 100 Thieves in the same spot as where they were last week. I do worry that this team kind of peaked at the start of the stage and now is starting to kind of show their true colors, but there still are overall a lot more positives about this team than I see negatives. I do think Xander being their new IGL has worked out pretty swimmingly. Kess, while isn't looking as good as his first few matches, still is looking like a very solid addition. Obviously there's just going to be a bit of a learning curve jumping up to tier 1 in the way that he did. Asuna is starting to show his inconsistencies again, but Cryocells is looking like the player that he has looked like all year, one of the best in the Americas. He's been their light at the end of the tunnel, and if him, EU, Kess can all heat up for the playoff bracket, then this team could go on a run. It is possible for them. Those 3rd and 4th spots for champions, those championship points specifically, are just wide open right now, because who knows if G2 and Sentinels, the two teams already confirmed to go to champs, are they even going to go to grand finals? In fact, 100 Thieves is going to be against G2 to open their playoffs, so they're really going to need to come out swinging. That is not going to be an easy matchup for them. It's going to be a huge test for these players. That is definitely going to be a bloodbath, so 100 Thieves are going to need to be ready. Moving on to the number 4 spot, no change yet again. We have Leviathan. So Leviathan were against 100 Thieves, and those teams are neck and neck in the power rankings, and Leviathan were able to win that one, so no change for them. They don't get to move up because I feel like the teams above them are still looking better than them, but I have continuously been impressed by what I've seen from Leviathan during this stage. Sato looks like one of the best mid-season additions a team can make. He's been fragging out heavy, he's been their best player nearly every game. While we have players like Tex and Kane really starting to find their stride as well, Okeanos looking like a solid addition too. There's a lot to like about this team. They are opening their playoff bracket against C9. I'm not going to say who I'm predicting for that one yet, but with where Leviathan are on the board and where C9 is and how C9 have historically done in playoff brackets, I do think Leviathan are favored for that matchup. So we will see what ends up happening. Maybe the inexperience of both Sato and Okeanos starts to catch up to them at some point, but Leviathan looked like they were in a bit of trouble early in the stage, but then recovered and now look pretty good. So we will see what ends up happening for them, but I like what I've seen. Moving on to the number 3 spot, no change from last week as well for this one. Number 3 is Energy. Energy, I do think deserve to be in this spot. I was worried for them in that crew match at first. That map 1 of Sunset did look pretty rough from them, but they made the proper adjustments. They started playing their game and they looked a lot better, winning both map 2 and 3 pretty convincingly. The closest of those scores was 13-7 on the Lotus, whereas the Haven was a 13-5 win. So they pretty much dominated crew after that first map, looking pretty angry and wanting revenge for that one. So Energy are looking quite solid right now. In fact, they ended up locking up top spot in their entire group, which if you had said that that was going to happen even just a few weeks ago, that might have been a bit of a pipe dream. But Energy bounced back really well from starting their stage at a pretty rough spot, losing that first game against 100 Thieves, but then they ended up not losing a single game after that. Heading into playoffs with a 4-1 record, very good work from them. This looks like a team that made the proper adjustments between stage 1 and stage 2, and now it's paying off. Will it pay off in playoffs? Well, they don't need to win too many games to be able to make it to champions. Technically, they just need to win 2. Unless they get knocked down to the lower bracket, then it's going to have to be more. But they do have that bye round. They're waiting for the winner of G2 versus 100 Thieves, so whoever they end up facing, it's going to be pretty interesting. Alright, moving on to the top 2 spots. So, is there going to be any movement here? This is a very similar power rankings to how we had last week, but is there any change with the top 2 teams? I decided that yes. Sentinels are moving down 1, and G2 is moving up. So the reason for this is not because I think Sentinels really deserve to move down. I kind of think of these teams right now as basically neck and neck. So Sentinels do end up getting a win over 2 game, but they did lose a map against 2 game, but then they dominated on maps 2 and 3. So it's a pretty similar game to what G2 experienced when they played Evil Geniuses. But I think what's different about those two things is that G2 lost on Corrode, which is a new map that G2 haven't really found their stride on yet. It seems like they're more focused on practicing that map than really getting a ton of wins on it. Whereas Sentinels lost on Sunset, a map that historically they've been very good on. So that is a bit concerning to me. 2 game is quite good on Sunset though. That was easily their best map. And apparently Sentinels have scrimmed 2 game like 39 times this entire season, so I mean, I guess they're practice partners, so I guess 2 game had a really good read on Sentinels Sunset, but it did make me a little bit worried for Sentinels map pool. But overall, both these teams are looking absolutely fantastic. It looks like even without Leaf on the team, G2 might be the best team in the entire region right now. I do think if these 2 teams were playing now versus at the start of the stage, we'd probably see G2 win that one. Baby Bay has really found his stride. He's actually been a very good performer for this team, playing very intelligently, playing his role properly. It is obviously a joke that he's the caster and coming in is kind of like a haha funny, you lost to a caster, but he's genuinely been quite good. Whereas Sentinels, they still look really fantastic. I'm not too worried about them. They're already in champs and maybe they just took a bit of a breather against 2 game on that Sunset, but they still dominated those last 2 maps. But I felt like if there was 1 week during the group stage to swap these teams, I felt like this was the week to do it. But you can let me know in the comment section down below if you disagree with me on that ranking or any other ranking. Doing these power rankings weekly during the group stage, and now that's playoffs, I will only be doing one after the playoff bracket, as doing one in the middle of the playoff bracket doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense. Maybe I'll reconsider that, but I don't think I will. But that is where my head is at with this. Let me know in the comment section down below, what are your rankings? How do you think playoffs is going to shake out? Which team has the best chance? Who's going to champions aside from G2 and Sen? I have no idea. It's going to be a very, very interesting playoff bracket for the Americas. Anyways, please click like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.